This is the new 2022 BMW M5 CS, and it's the ultimate performance sedan from BMW ever. 630 horsepower, 550 pound-feet of torque, 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds. It's a total muscle car with a $150,000 price tag. And today, I'm going to review it. Before I get started, be sure to check out Cars and Bids, which is my enthusiast car auction website for cool cars from the modern era, now with free listings. You can list your cool car for free and auction it on Cars and Bids. And we've had some fantastic sales recently, including this Mercedes-AMG E63 wagon, which sold for almost $120,000, this gorgeous Mazda RX-7 FD, which brought more than $52,000, and this 2012 Nissan GTR, which sold for $68,000 with some great modifications. If you're looking to buy or sell a cool enthusiast car from the modern era, Cars and Bids is the place to do it, with daily auctions and great selection at carsandbids.com. So let's talk M5 CS. The M5 has always been the high-performance version of BMW's midsize 5 Series sedan, and the latest version came out for the 2018 model year. There's a new 5 Series coming soon, and so BMW is sending out this M5 with an amazing swan song, the M5 CS, the ultimate M5 ever. And today I'm going to review it. First, I'll take you on a thorough tour of it and show you all of its quirks and features. Then I'll get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'll give it a Doug score. Alright, I'm going to start the quirks and features, the M5 CS, with its biggest feature, and that would be performance and other enhancements over the regular M5. So let's start with powertrain. You can see the engine here under this cover. It looks like carbon fiber, and it says BMW M Power in large print with an M badge and M colors. And under that you will find the twin turbocharged V8 that makes 627 horsepower in this car. Now, a standard M5 is at 600 horsepower. The M5 competition is at 617. This 627 means it's the most powerful road car that BMW has ever built in its entire history, which is pretty impressive. Now, this car also has about 550 pound-feet of torque. That number isn't changed from the M5 competition. They're just the same. Maybe the bigger story here, though, is weight savings. This car, BMW says, is over 200 pounds lighter than an M5 competition. That's a big deal because these cars have gotten pretty heavy, so pulling out weight is always nice. The result is a curb weight of just a little over 4,000 pounds. All of these changes add up to amazing acceleration. BMW says 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds, 2.9, although some testers have got it down to 2.6 seconds, 0 to 60. Of course, with its all-wheel drive launch, that is a pretty fast car. And as you might imagine, there are considerably more upgrades to the M5 CS than just a little more power and lighter weight. One is suspension, which has been upgraded here even over the regular M5 competition for better handling. This car also has stiffer engine mounts shared with the M5 competition, and it's been lowered compared to the regular M5, although that lowering is also shared with the M5 comp. Now, one other change here is the brakes. The CS comes standard with carbon ceramic brakes, and not only do they provide excellent stopping power, reduced brake fade, and their huge 15.7-inch front brakes, but they also save weight. BMW says going to carbon ceramic saved about 50 total pounds, which helped keep the curb weight down in the CS. And beyond the brakes, there are also a few other notable and interesting ways that this car saved weight. It has a carbon fiber roof. Now, that's available on all M5 models, but the CS takes it a step further with a carbon fiber hood. And you can see underneath the hood, you have visible carbon fiber, and M5 CS is imprinted into the bottom of the hood just to make sure there's no question about exactly what this car is. Now, on the outside of the hood, you can also see a change compared to other M5s. You have a power bulge, a bigger one in the CS. than other M5 models, and you also have a couple of vents, I guess for better heat dissipation, but really they're probably there to just add some visual flair to the CS. And there are more ways to tell apart the M5 CS from other M5 models than just the hood. Probably the most noticeable is the bronze. This car comes with a lot of bronze accents. The most obvious is the wheels. You can see they are painted bronze, very different from other M5s, very unique and certainly stands out. But there's more bronze than that. This little side gill thing, this trim piece on the front fender, as you can see, painted in bronze and says M5 CS if you look closely. The front grille, the trim surrounding it, is all bronze, as you can also see, distinctive to the M5 CS. And same deal in back, M5 CS badging is bronze in this car to help it stand out from other lesser M5s. A lot of bronze on the outside. And you can tell apart the CS in other ways too. There's a small carbon fiber front lip spoiler, as you can see, not huge or excessive, but it's there and it's distinctive to the CS. And the rear diffuser is much larger, very noticeable, very pronounced, and that too is distinctive to the CS for a more performance-y look. But quite possibly the most obvious way you can tell apart an M5 CS from other M5 models is the running lights, which are yellow in the M5 CS. This isn't modified, this is factory, and it's unique to the M5 CS, these yellow running lights, which are very noticeable, very distinctive. You can spot it from a mile away, and those yellow lights say CS. They also say French cars in the 1970s. But anyway, other changes to the M5 CS, probably the biggest on the outside is color. This car is only offered in 3 colors, really. There's a regular gray that you can get that looks like a normal color, or you can upgrade to this gray, which BMW calls a frozen paint color, meaning that it has a matte finish and looks cool and muscly. And there's also a matte finish green that you can get with this car as well. Matte green with gold wheels. It actually looks a lot better than you might think. Now, the other color choice on the outside is the brake calipers. You can go with red like we have here, or as a no-cost option, you can get bronze to match the wheels and some of the other exterior trim. But those are your only 2 choices of brakes and 3 choices of colors. But for as few choices there are on the outside of this car, there's even fewer inside. In fact, there's none. This interior is the only one you can get. Black with various red accents, red stitching throughout. This is the only way the interior comes in this car. So not many choices of color on the outside, but only this choice of interior on the inside. However, that is not the most notable thing about the interior of this car. No, that honor certainly goes to the seats. The regular luxurious 5 Series seats have been replaced with these lightweight sport bucket seats, as you can see, and they are unusual to see in a luxury sedan. Let's just put it that way. They're heavily bolstered on the backrest and on the sides. They have holes throughout them where you can stick a safety harness through if you want to do that on your M5. You can see they even have this carbon fiber centerpiece in the bottom, which is fixed in place, kind of rough. These are very excessively sporty seats for a car like this. But that isn't even the most interesting part. That honor goes to the back seats, which are also sport bucket seats. You can see 2 individual heavily bolstered sport bucket seats to mimic what you have in front. Not quite the same design or level of bolstering, but it's damn close. You rarely see sport seats front and rear, but you have that here. Just in case you want to take your whole family on the racetrack with helmets, you have bucket seats in this car front and rear to do it, and you thought your 2 bucket seats in your GT3 RS was cool. Now, the drawback of these rear seats being sport buckets is that there's no room for a middle passenger because the bolstering comes up so high, it just wouldn't work. It wouldn't be comfortable. So this is a 4-seater car. And instead, in the rear middle, you have this little storage tray, which I guess you could stick stuff in. And you also have CS emblazoned with little dots where the backrest would be. You can see it between the 2 seats, CS, to remind you what you're in. Now, speaking of trim on the seats, one other cool item, if you look closely at the headrest, you will see the outline of the Nürburgring. You can see it's not colored, it's not stitched, but it's in there if you look closely. Both front and rear seats have it. The back seats have it in the headrest also, just to remind all passengers that they're in a high-performance, track-ready sedan. And of course, as you might imagine, you have more cosmetic changes on the inside than just those. If you open up the back door, you can see the M logo in the door sill. If you open up the front door, you can see the M5 CS on the front doors. I guess they didn't have enough space to put it in back, so you're just stuck with M. Up here you also have CS printed on the dashboard. You can see in red against a carbon fiber look background, which is cool. And you also have a very neat touch. The little display screen that shows if a door is open shows this car with gold wheels, because the CSs all have bronze wheels, and so they changed that little picture just for the CS models to match, which I think is wonderfully cool. Now, one other change to note in this interior, this car has less sound deadening materials compared to other M5s. They pulled out some of the luxury insulation in an attempt to save weight. Although driving this car around, it still feels very luxurious and very quiet in here, so I guess they didn't pull out much, but that was a way they got some weight savings for the CS. And one other cosmetic touch I love in here, even though it's not unique to the CS, I always adore BMW doing M-colored stitching. On the steering wheel, you can see it here. The M colors are sort of interspersed and it looks so cool. And you can also see it on the seat belts right here, the M colors trimmed down the side, which I just think is a fantastic little touch on BMW M cars. Now, another notable item in this interior is just how configurable this car is. You can configure it for just about any type of driving. Let's start with the screen. The engine, the chassis, and the steering each have 3 different settings that you can select from to personalize your precise drive mode for the type of driving you're doing. Now, you also have 3 different selectable modes for the transmission. This little button here on top of the transmission you can press to adjust like shifting and shift tightness to improve your performance. And you can also turn on and off the sport exhaust. That's this button here. You tap it to turn it on or off. Let's take a listen to the sport exhaust on. And one very cool adjustment you can make in this car is you can adjust the drivetrain. These, in their standard normal configuration, are all-wheel drive, but you can also select an all-wheel drive sport mode, and you can even put it in 2-wheel drive, which is rear-wheel drive, of course, if you don't want all 4 wheels working and you just want rear-wheel drive. You don't often see that level of configurability, but you have it here. Now, all of these buttons are a lot. Many different settings and adjustments you can make for driving this car, but BMW has made it easy to configure it exactly how you want with favorite buttons. They're right here on the steering wheel, these 2 red buttons, M1 and M2, and they're configurable. So if you have like a favorite drive mode for driving on your favorite canyon road, you can set it to M1 and then just tap it with your thumb, easy reach, and then you're suddenly in your very favorite drive mode without having to adjust each individual setting. And you have a second one of those for M2, for maybe the track or just commuting to work. You can set it as M2 and then just tap it and you go into your other favorite drive mode, and you don't have to go through all of these difficult configurations since your favorites are right there within a thumb's reach. But you can take it even further than that if you want to. There's a button in the center console marked M mode. If you press that and hold it down, you go into track mode. Although you also have to triple confirm you want track mode by then selecting it on the screen. And once you go there, everything changes. First off, the center infotainment screen shuts off completely because they figure you don't need that on the racetrack. Also, the gauge cluster screen becomes more focused, showing you like a single display with your tachometer front and center since it's most important. And track mode also turns off your safety aids. So all the driving safety stuff, stability control and collision warning, all that's gone if you're in track mode because they figure by that point you know what you're doing. And that's why you have to confirm so many times you want to go in. Now, all of these adjustments, 2-wheel drive, 4-wheel drive, steering, handling, track mode, M1, M2, it seems like a lot. And I've read some reviews that actually complain about the sheer amount of adjustability in this car. But personally, I think it's kind of cool. For a car that's a luxury sedan and a sports car, it's neat to be able to maximize both ends of that spectrum. You can commute to work in this car in the most comfortable modes, and then you can get on a racetrack on the weekends and hang with sports cars by going into the craziest drive modes. It's nice to see that wide range of configurability in here. But anyway, next up, let's talk technology in the M5 CS. 2 major screens in here, the gauge cluster and the center screen, but let's start with that center infotainment screen. You can control it 2 ways, either as a touch screen where it's very responsive as you can see, or with this little dial and series of buttons in the center console, you can pick how it's easier to control. Now, I like BMW's infotainment. Again, very responsive, but also very intuitive, large print, easy to read, easy to figure out, surprisingly simple, especially considering just how many features this car has. The only real drawback to this center screen is you can't do multiple things at once. So like you can't have your nav system and your radio on at once, which is a little disappointing, especially with a screen this large, but generally speaking, this is a fantastic and easy infotainment system, and I like it a lot. Now, I have less praise for the gauge cluster screen. This is a full screen gauge cluster, as you can see, but it's surprisingly not very configurable considering how large it is and the fact that it's a screen. You can configure what's over on the right portion, and you can see various different items, your tire pressure, the song that's playing, all sorts of different stuff over in that right panel, which is nice, but that's about all you can configure in this screen. Other automakers let you do full screens and change it to whatever you want, but not so in the M5. Now, newer BMW models have more configurability in their gauge cluster, but this version of the 5 Series is getting older, and that technology certainly is starting to feel like it's aging. Now, there is one other display screen in this front seat area, and that would be the climate controls, which are controlled with physical buttons, as you can see, but then some of the controls are in a screen. Now, normally I complain about climate controls in a screen, but this is very easy to use, simple to figure out, no real drawbacks to this. Just a little odd to see some of these controls integrated into a screen and some as physical buttons. And speaking of buttons in this center control stack, I will never not love BMW preset buttons, which you can see are located here in the middle. Now, the cool thing is these aren't just radio presets. You can program them to do a wide variety of things, like number 6 is set the navigation destination for home, various different stuff. But the coolest part is that they show you what they do when you slide your fingers over them. So if you're not sure what you've programmed them for, just slide your finger over and it appears on the screen letting you know what each preset does before you actually press it. And I think that's a fantastic idea, especially if you don't use presets that often and you're trying to remember which is which. But anyway, next we move on to the back of the M5 CS, and I gotta say, this is wild. I cannot believe I am sitting in tight bucket seats in the back of a luxury sedan, and they are pretty tight. They're not like incredibly keep you in your place tight, you gotta scrunch in, but they're not that far off considering this is the back seat. I never see rear seats like this, and it's just kind of funny that they added buckets in back. Now, beyond the bucket seats and associated accoutrement, there's not that much interesting back here actually, except the fact that you do have 4-zone climate control, meaning each rear passenger can set their own climate temperature, so they have perfect, wonderful climate comfort while sitting in their sport bucket seat on the racetrack. You also have a couple of charge ports back here, 3 in fact, 2 USB-C and then 1 cigarette lighter style charge port as well, which is nice to have for the back seat to charge your devices. And next up we move on to the cargo area in this car, the trunk, which isn't particularly interesting or exciting. There's nothing unusual in here, as you can see. It's just a trunk reasonably large like a standard 5 Series. Now, this isn't a power closing trunk, although it's worth pointing out there is a lock button on the trunk lid, so you can press lock before you close the trunk, and that way you press lock, close the trunk, and the car locks, and you can walk away without having to press it on your key fob, which is nice. And next up, let's talk tires. This car is equipped with Michelin Pilot Sport 4S tires, which are excellent in my experience, but as a no-cost option, you could also get Pirelli P0 Corsa tires, which are grippier, but they'll also wear faster and they're more expensive to replace. However, if you want more grip, you can get those. And speaking of options and cost, should talk about pricing with this car. Starts around $142,000, but this one is equipped to just under $150,000. Now, these don't have a lot of options. The M5 CSs are generally built in pretty much one way, but this car has the frozen paint color, which is $5,000 extra, and that accounts for the majority of its optional extra cost. And so those are the quirks and features of the new 2022 BMW M5 CS. Now it's time to get it out on the road and see how it drives. All right, driving the M5 CS. Oh, wow. This thing is seriously fast. I drive a lot of exotic cars and sports cars. Just yesterday drove the McLaren 765 LT, which is a really fast car in its own right, and this is also just amazingly fast. Wow. serious speed from this car, and incredibly smoothly delivered speed. Twin turbocharged engines have come a long way since the days of my old Audi RS2 with its turbo motor that you gotta wait till it spools up and all that. This car is so linear in its power delivery, and you have it from everywhere. Now I'm in fifth gear going 80 and I put my foot down and I still have an enormous amount of power on tap. This car is just endlessly powerful and torquey, and it's incredible how fast it really is. Now, the one drawback in terms of acceleration, I will say, is the transmission is quick. It feels fast, it shifts well, but it's no dual clutch. You know, these automakers have all ditched dual clutches because the cars now just make so much power, it was difficult to reliably make a dual clutch that could do that. But you can tell the shift times are a little bit slower. I just reviewed the GT4 RS, the 765 LT, both of which have great dual clutches, and you can tell this car shifts lag a little. But the acceleration isn't really harmed as a result of that because it's still so incredibly fast. So I don't really see it as being a huge problem, and frankly, it makes the car a little bit smoother. Now, speaking of smoothness, I should mention I have this car in one of the M driving modes, and so the suspension is in a firmer setting, and it is harsh. Just about any bump, any pavement aberration you go over is tough and kind of makes you wince, and that's especially true considering you're sitting in a sedan. You know, you expect that from a GT4 RS or a 765 LT. You don't expect it from this car. However, that's, in my opinion, one of the cool things about this car. It is so configurable. At any moment, I can just dial it all back and go back into comfort suspension where it is surprisingly comfortable, and that is the cool thing here. Yes, it is excessively configurable, and I understand those complaints. You're constantly pressing buttons to dial it into just the right mode. But once you get into those modes, it's a pretty good thing. Now, I will also say about this car, the impressive thing to me is just how much smaller it feels than it is. The complaint that all the internet enthusiasts say about the BMWs, they're all getting so big. They're so big now compared to the old ones. They're not sports cars anymore. They're luxury cars. They're so big and heavy. And this car doesn't really feel like that. Yes, it is big and heavy. There's no question about that. But when you're in the right drive modes, you're in your sportiest settings, it feels a lot smaller. Obviously, acceleration is one thing. You step on it and it's just so fast that, like, you don't feel like you're driving 4,000 pounds as you vastly accelerate past everybody else on the road. But it's not just that. The steering is so good. The suspension is so good in the latest M5, but especially the competition, but especially the CS. It's just improved and improved and improved. And the result is that it helps mask the fact that this is a big car. It actually feels surprisingly spry and quick to change lanes, to go hard around corners. I took it on some really curvy roads yesterday, and it's fantastic at that. It does a tremendous job at zipping through corners and not making itself feel big. Now, it's no Porsche Cayman. You know, it's not a mid-engine tiny sports car, but if you want a luxury sedan that has sporty capabilities, you know you're going to be making some compromises to have the benefit of practicality. And this car doesn't make as many compromises as you might think. My favorite handling four-door car I've ever driven was the Mercedes-AMG GT63 four-door S, which I think is an amazing car. And I would say that this is just as good, if not even a little bit better than that. Truly fantastic steering and handling performance from this car, almost like a sports car. And I gotta say, this is probably the ultimate M5 ever, and I think the market is going to treat it like that long term. The F80 M3 CS has not been tremendously well regarded and revered, but I suspect that it will, and I suspect that this car will even become more revered as it ages. It's just good. It's really excellent in every level. And so that's the 2022 BMW M5 CS. This really is BMW's Hellcat with amazing power, amazing performance, some fantastic upgrades, all crammed into the 5 Series, which is BMW's relatively normal mid-size sedan. This is a truly impressive car, and now it's time to give the M5 CS a DOUGSCORE. And the Doug score is here, 72 out of 100, which places the M5 CS here against other similar cars. The M5 CS ties the AMG E63 wagon and the Audi RS6 Avant, which is an amazing feat because those two score extra points for practicality, but the M5 CS earns such a higher weekend score that it still manages to tie. The M5 CS might just be the most exciting four-door car I've ever driven, at or above the same level as the Porsche Taycan Turbo S and the Mercedes AMG GT63 S four-door. This really is the ultimate M5.